The body in room 4, the overnight shift at St. Catherine's Hospital, always began the same way. The day staff filtered out through the main lobby, coats pulled tight, voices dropping as they passed through the automatic doors into the cold night air. The hallways slowly emptied, the lights dimmed in the sections that saw no traffic after hours, and the building settled into that particular quiet that only large old structures ever truly achieve. A quiet that was never completely silent. There were always sounds in a hospital at night, the low hum of ventilation systems pushing air through ductwork in the walls, the occasional chime of a monitor somewhere down a hallway, the soft footsteps of a nurse making rounds. Teresa had worked the overnight shift in the hospital morgue for 6 years. She was good at her job precisely because she did not frighten easily. She had made peace long ago with the nature of her work, with the stillness of it, with what it meant to be the last person responsible for someone before they were released to their family. She treated every person in her care with the same quiet dignity. That was what made the night of November 14th so difficult to explain. The body had come down from the 3rd floor just after 2 a.m, an elderly man. No family had been reached yet. His chart listed a heart condition that had been worsening for some time, and the attending physician had noted his passing as expected and unremarkable. Teresa received the paperwork, confirmed the identification, and transferred the man carefully into the cold storage unit designated as room 4. She returned to her desk. The paperwork took about 20 minutes to complete. Standard documentation. Nothing unusual. When she stood to make her first rounds of the night, she noticed the temperature reading above room 4 was slightly higher than the others. She assumed the seal on the door had not caught properly. It happened occasionally. She crossed the room and checked the handle. The door was fully closed. She opened it to verify the internal temperature with a handheld gauge. The reading was normal inside. She closed the door again and watched the external display. The temperature reading climbed again, slowly, just a degree or 2 above the others, but consistently higher than it should have been. Teresa documented the discrepancy and made a note to have maintenance check the unit in the morning. She went back to her desk. An hour passed without incident. Then the movement sensor in the corridor outside the storage units activated. Teresa looked up at the monitor displaying the hallway feed. The corridor was empty. The sensor reset after 30 seconds of no detected movement. Then it activated again. She watched the monitor carefully. The hallway remained empty. No visible cause for the activation. No draft from an open door. No cart rolling through, no person visible in the frame. She got up and walked to the corridor herself. Nothing there. She stood in the hallway for a moment, listening. The ventilation hummed. A monitor chimed somewhere far above her on an upper floor, and then, very faintly, she heard something from behind the door of room 4. It was soft, almost like breathing. She told herself it was the mechanical noise of the cooling unit cycling. She told herself she was tired and her mind was filling silence with shapes. She had been in this job long enough to know that the imagination, left alone in a quiet building at 3 a.m, was capable of remarkable cruelty. She put her hand on the door. The metal felt warm, not the ambient temperature of a hallway at night. Warm the way skin feels warm. Teresa stood very still with her hand pressed flat against the door. The sound came again, slow, rhythmic, coming from inside. She took a step back. She looked at the temperature display above the door. It had climbed another degree. She reached for her radio to call the security desk on the ground floor. She pressed the call button. Static answered her. She tried again, more static. The unit appeared to be functioning. The signal simply was not connecting. She looked back at the door. The temperature display ticked upward again, and then the handle moved. Not all the way, not thrown open, just a slight, slow depression of the lever, the way a handle moves when weight is placed on it gently from the other side. Teresa did not move. The handle held its depressed position for a long moment. Then it returned slowly to its resting place. The temperature display above room 4 read the same as all the others now. Perfectly normal. The movement sensor in the corridor did not activate again that night. Teresa stood in that hallway until her radio crackled back to life with the security guard asking if everything was all right on the lower level. She told him it was. She never opened the door to room 4 again that night, and in the morning, when the day shift arrived and the documentation was reviewed, the attending physician who had signed the paperwork came down to the lower level with a look on his face that Teresa would not forget for a long time. He told her there had been a clerical error overnight. The man in room 4 had been sent to the wrong department. He had not been scheduled for the morgue. He had been transferred from the 3rd floor to be moved to a private recovery room. He had been alive when he arrived. The blood that came back. The hospital laboratory operated around the clock without interruption. Unlike most departments that slowed after midnight, the lab never truly stopped. Samples arrived at all hours. Results were needed at all hours. The machines that processed blood and tissue ran their cycles continuously, indifferent to the time of day or the number of people watching over them. Nora had worked the overnight laboratory shift for 4 years. Her job was to process whatever came through, run the appropriate tests, and report the findings to the requesting physician. Most nights the work was routine to the point of being meditative. Tubes of blood arriving in a pneumatic capsule. Samples logged, centrifuged, analyzed, reported. A steady rhythm that carried her through until morning. The sample that arrived at 1:47 in the morning looked ordinary. A single tube of blood, deep red, almost black in the low overhead light. The label attached to the tube had a patient identification number, but no name, which was unusual but not unheard of in cases where a patient arrived without documentation. She logged it into the system and placed it in the centrifuge with several other samples. The centrifuge ran its cycle, 7 minutes. The machine hummed at its familiar pitch, spinning the contents of each tube to separate the components by density. When the cycle finished, Nora opened the centrifuge and retrieved the samples. Every tube looked exactly as it should, except the unlabeled one. It had not separated. Blood centrifuged properly always separated into distinct visible layers. The heavier components sank, the lighter ones floated. It was a simple and reliable process that Nora had watched thousands of times, but the contents of this tube looked exactly the same as when it had gone in, uniformly dark, completely unseparated. She assumed the tube had not been positioned correctly. She ran the centrifuge again. 7 minutes, same result. She tried a 3rd time, still the same. She set the tube aside and ran the standard panel of tests on the other samples before returning to it. When she picked it up again to try a manual inspection under the laboratory light, she noticed something that made her set it back down slowly. The level of blood inside the tube was higher than it had been. She had not added anything to it. She looked at the measurement markings on the side of the tube. It had been just under 3/4 full when it arrived. It was now completely full. Nora stood at her workstation for a moment without moving. Then she picked up the tube again and looked at it more carefully under the light. The blood inside was moving. not the passive movement of liquid responding to the motion of being picked up. Something slower than that, something that continued even after her hand was completely still, a slow circular drift, as though something inside the tube was generating its own current. She placed the tube in the specimen rack and stepped back. The contents continued their slow rotation. She reached for her phone to call the attending physician whose number was attached to the order. The number rang out. She tried the on-call physician instead. No answer. She tried the charge nurse on the floor the sample had come from. The line connected, but no one spoke. She could hear the background sounds of the ward, the distant hum of equipment, the faint ambience of a hospital floor at night, but no voice responded to her. She said hello twice, and the line disconnected. Nora looked back at the specimen rack. There were now 2 tubes where there had been one, both filled with the same dark, moving blood. She had not touched the rack since placing the original tube in it. Both tubes were rotating slowly, synchronized, turning in opposite directions like gears. She left the laboratory and walked to the security desk on the ground floor and told the guard on duty that she needed someone to come upstairs with her. He asked what was wrong. She told him she was not entirely sure. When they returned to the laboratory together, the specimen rack held only 1 tube, the original, filled to the original level, completely still. The guard looked around the empty laboratory, checked the storage units, checked the hallway outside, and found nothing unusual. He told her she had probably just needed a break and some fresh air. Long nights in the lab could do that. He smiled and left. Nora stood at her workstation and looked at the tube. She ran every test in the standard panel. Every single result came back normal. Unremarkably, perfectly normal. She filed the report and logged the sample as processed. But she never submitted the notes she had written during the night describing what she had observed. She deleted them before her shift ended, because there was one final thing she had not written down and could not bring herself to document in any official record. When she had run the blood type analysis as part of the standard panel, the machine had returned a result she had never encountered in 4 years of laboratory work. Not A, not B, not O, not any recognized type at all. The machine had simply printed the word unknown and stopped processing. The night shift on Haverford 6. The psychiatric observation ward on the 6th floor of Haverford General was not a place that inspired fear on its own. It was clean, it was well lit. The staff who worked there were experienced and professional and genuinely dedicated to their patients. The rooms were simple but comfortable. The hallways were wide. There was nothing visibly wrong with Haverford 6. But every nurse who worked there long enough eventually noticed the same thing. The patients on 6 always seemed to know things they should not have known. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way of movies or ghost stories, in small, quiet, unsettling ways that were easy to dismiss individually but became harder to ignore when they accumulated over months and years. A patient who had been admitted that same morning asking a nurse about her mother by name. Her mother who had died 2 years prior. Her mother whose name appeared nowhere in any file or record connected to that nurse. A patient who had not left his room in 11 days describing the layout of a house fire that had happened across the city the previous night in a neighborhood he had never been to, with details that matched the news report that aired the following morning. A patient who knocked on her own door from the inside at 3 a.m, and when the night nurse opened it, told her very calmly that the man in room 614 needed to be checked on immediately. Room 614 was empty, or it had been empty. The nurse who went to check found a patient who had been transferred to Haverford 6 just 2 hours earlier, listed as stable and resting, now in serious distress and in need of immediate intervention. The patient in the other room had no way of knowing he was there. She had been admitted before him. These things were talked about quietly among the staff who worked 6, shared over coffee at the end of long shifts, offered to new hires as casual warnings wrapped in the language of coincidence and tired minds playing tricks. Most people who heard the stories nodded and filed them away and got on with their work. Ellen had worked Haverford 6 for 2 years when the night happened that she could never fully explain to anyone who had not been there themselves. It was a Wednesday in late February. The ward had 8 patients. All of them had been assessed that evening as calm and stable. It was the kind of night that experienced staff recognized immediately as either genuinely quiet or deceptively quiet, and you never knew which one until morning. Ellen was doing her rounds at midnight when the patient in room 609 stopped her in the hallway. His name was Mr. Aldrich. He was in his 60s, soft-spoken, admitted 3 weeks earlier, following a breakdown brought on by prolonged sleep deprivation. He had been improving steadily. His medication was working. He slept well most nights and participated thoughtfully in his daily sessions. He was standing in his doorway in his hospital-issued robe, arms folded loosely, looking down the hallway toward the far end of the ward. Ellen asked if he was all right. He said he was fine. He said he simply could not sleep. She asked if he wanted her to let the overnight doctor know, to see if anything could help. He shook his head. He said it was not his sleep he was worried about. Ellen asked what he meant. He looked at her directly then, with an expression that was not agitated or frightened, or any of the things she might have expected from a patient awake at midnight on a psychiatric ward. He looked concerned, the way a person looks when they are about to deliver news they would rather not deliver. He told her that the woman at the end of the hall had been standing there for a very long time. Ellen looked toward the far end of the corridor. The hallway was empty. She told Mr. Aldrich gently that there was no one there. He looked back down the hall. His expression did not change. He said he understood that she could not see her. Ellen stood very still. He said the woman had been standing at the end of the hall for the past 3 nights. He said she stood in the same spot each time, near the window that overlooked the east side of the building. He said she never moved and never made a sound, and he had assumed at first that she was a member of staff he had not yet encountered. But staff members cast shadows, and this woman did not. Ellen kept her voice calm and professional. She thanked Mr. Aldrich for telling her, asked him to try to rest, and gently guided him back toward his room. She told him she would look into it. She told him he was safe. He nodded before going in, but at the door he stopped and looked back at her. He told her one more thing. He said the woman at the end of the hall had started turning around the previous night. Ellen asked what he meant. He said that for the first 2 nights the woman had been facing the window, just standing there, facing out toward the dark. But the previous night she had turned around, and she was facing the hallway now, facing inward, facing toward the rooms. Ellen finished her rounds and wrote up the encounter as an observational note in Mr. Aldrich's file. Mild nocturnal ideation, possibly linked to residual sleep disruption. Monitor and reassess. Clinical language, measured language. The language of someone doing their job properly. She did not write down what she noticed as she walked the length of that hallway alone at the end of her rounds. The window at the far end of the north corridor overlooked the east side of the building, just as Mr. Aldrich had described. Beyond that window was a sheer drop to the courtyard 6 floors below. No ledge, no balcony, no fire escape on that side of the building. Nowhere for anyone to stand, and yet. When Ellen paused at the far end of the hallway that night and looked at the glass, she could see her own reflection perfectly clearly. Her own face looking back at her from the dark glass, her own posture, her own uniform, and just behind her reflection, slightly to the left, the faint outline of a second figure, standing still, facing inward. Ellen did not turn around. She walked back to the nurse's station at a steady pace and sat down and turned on every monitor on the desk and kept the ward intercom open for the remainder of her shift. She transferred off Haverford 6 the following month. She told her supervisor she needed a change of pace. Her supervisor understood. Staff turnover on 6 had always been higher than the other floors. Nobody ever talked about why. But if you asked the patients on Haverford 6, the ones who had been there long enough to notice, they would tell you the same thing without hesitation. The woman at the end of the hall had been there for years. Long before the current staff, long before most of the current building, standing at that window, patient as stone, waiting for someone to finally look back. If you made it to the end of this one, you are braver than most. Subscribe, leave a comment if you dare, and come back soon. There is always another story waiting in the dark.